I'm Rich Bacolor, science consultant for Wayne County RESA, and today I'm talking to Josh Hubbard. Hi, Josh.
Morning or afternoon, I guess it is now.
Time means nothing right now, Josh.
That's right. It's quarantine time. We don't know what time it is.
That's right. But we were just reaching out to some teachers who have adapted some of their classroom practices, especially around NGSS, to this new environment that we're teaching in. So thank you for spending some time with us. And can you tell us a little bit about where you teach and what you teach?
Thanks for having me on. I enjoy listening to podcasts from other science teachers. It helps me be a better person in teaching. So hopefully, as we get to listen to all this stuff, it's going to be great. So I teach at Allen Park Intercity Baptist, which is a small private school about 15 minutes south of Detroit. I've been teaching there since 2006, and I teach currently teaching sophomore biology and a senior biology elective, but I've taught 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade sciences throughout the time frame I've been there as well. I'm a little biased, obviously, but I do love the life sciences better than the other side.
I think we all have our favorites, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, so Josh, first of all, this is a weird time, obviously, for everybody, but especially maybe more so for teachers. Can you tell us a little bit about your home situation? How has it been managing the current situation? Because I know your wife is also in the healthcare profession. So tell us a little bit about how it's been.
It's been really interesting. So my wife is a physician assistant in the ER. She works at a hospital in Southfield and then another one in Novi. And so obviously when she comes home from a shift in ER, got to do the full decontamination type thing. So that's been interesting. And then teaching from home is just weird. Trying to manage the pace that you were and goals that you were trying to get done for the end of the school year, and then all of a sudden, like, all that's just blown out of the water. And so teaching, our school is pretty blessed. All of our kids, basically 6 to 12 at our school, have access to a device. And so we have live check-ins, classes, if you want to call them that, every day. And so we're able to meet and see kids almost every day. So that makes it a little better than a lot of other places have been able to do. But it's difficult to try to do science the right way, the NGSS way, in this current environment.
Yeah, and you have kids of your own.
Yeah, correct? I have 3 kids, 2 that are in school. So I'm trying to do homeschool. My wife's trying to do homeschool. In between, she goes to work some days, so I'm making videos. I can't do a live check-in with kids, or if she's home, then I'm doing a live check-in with my kids in the basement while she's upstairs trying to help them get started. So it's a circus, fun circus. Got to do what you got to do. Look at the bright side of things and see the kids learning. Is exciting because I don't, as a teacher, you don't get to see your own kids that often.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could expand on some of the things that have been, besides the circus aspects of it. What are some other things that have been particularly challenging in terms of engaging with the students?
I mean, at the most fundamental level, and even like I mentioned, the very blessed situation that I'm in, having kids connect all the time. I think that's a huge challenge, trying to get to find where your kids are and get them the stuff to help them and meet those needs. That I think is probably a huge challenge. But even just trying to keep up the same type of environment. So I'm really big on discussion and talking and questioning through things. And that's really difficult to do over a Zoom call or a Google Hangouts call or whatever platform you happen to be using, because a lot of times the kids just stay muted and they just kind of stare at you. And you have to fight that tendency to revert back to, I am the one with all the knowledge, and you need to sit here, at my feet, and I will just expand your brains with my great
Yeah.
lesson plans. I think that's a huge challenge because NGSS is not designed around that way, and trying to do that over Zoom or a Google Hangout is difficult.
So it's challenging, even if you can get kids online.
Yes.
It's challenging to keep up that discussion or that two-way communication.
Yeah, not having access to the nonverbals, you can sense when another kid's about to say something in class, and you got, everyone's kind of looking at each other, and now they're just looking at a little square, and they can kind of see your heads, or maybe the lights are dark and you can't even see the kid in there. So losing that nonverbal, I think, is pretty huge, to know when to speak and even to know who is speaking. Sometimes you got 30 plus kids on a call trying to all talk at the same time with varying levels of internet access is interesting to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. So how about some wins? What have you found successful, or what kinds of things have you been able to accomplish despite all of that?
So I think one of the things that you can do regardless is still have kind of that phenomenon idea out in front, and giving the kids, even if it's an email, a text message, a live call, you can still give them something that makes them think and then allows them to start building models off of that. So they're still been able to do. We did one. We're in a genetics unit with the sophomores, and we did a phenomenon to start mitosis and meiosis. We were talking about this idea, twins that everyone can tell apart. And there's a story of a family who, I think it was the father was of Jamaican descent and the mother was of English descent. And then they had twin daughters, one who was dark skinned and one who's lighter skinned, and try to, like, okay, how could that happen? Right. And so you can still present those phenomenons, and get kids talking and writing, and so that's been helpful. So even though I've lost some of the live question and back and forth, you can still start with the phenomenon. That's been good. And then using some tools, Flipgrid has been pretty helpful with that, because kids can write a picture and show you their model, or they can screen share, or they can just talk into it, and then they can reply back and forth to each other, and you can reply to them. So it gives you a little bit of that one-on-one. So I think those have probably been the two biggest wins so far.
And that's the Flipgrid thing is something that they can just upload a video response to you, and then other people can respond to whenever they happen to be online. Is that right?
Yeah, and they got an app for the phone, and you can access it via laptop as well. So they can just talk into it, and you have the ability to restrict access to the videos individually. So if you want to do a little more assessment that way, just getting kids to talk, they can turn the video camera off. So if you have shy kids that don't really want to talk, they can type in there. So you have access to a lot of different ways to help kids communicate that information, because we don't know what's in their head unless they tell us, right? And multiple choice aren't always the best way to pull out what's actually in there to see what their connections have.
Are you guys using any other learning management system, like a Google Classroom or anything like that?
We've landed the plane to kind of exist in the Google ecosystem. Okay. So we're pretty heavy. Kids got Chromebooks, Classroom, using Google Meet as we can, Google Forms for quizzes, things like that. YouTube videos embed really nice into Google Slides. So we've stayed there.
A lot of times after the phenomena, we gather up student questions. So do you have any strategies that have helped in getting up those sort of initial questions or initial models?
So we've used Google Classroom has a feature that allows kids to write private comments, and then there's also class comments. So getting kids to write down, give me 3 questions. Or what I do oftentimes in my class is I want a who question, a what question, when, a where, a why, how, and say, you got to give me one of each of those. So we've done that. The question formation technique, QFT, I think is pretty helpful. If you've already done that in your class and class have already had that, I think you can pull that off via Google Classroom or any other online management system. So I think that's the idea of questioning is really, really pretty important for that.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the question formulation technique for people that may not be familiar with that?
So the idea with QFT or question formation technique is you give them a short statement. So like I did for this example, the phenomenon we did was just twins. And so you give them a timer, which is a little difficult if you're asynchronous, but take 4 minutes and come up with as many questions as you can. And so the kids and there's certain rules, like you write down exactly what they say. You don't try to talk about it or argue who's right or wrong. You just write it down. And you're just trying to get kids to talk in the form of questions. And then they go back and they start analyzing. This is an open-ended question. This is a closed question. They can reverse the closed to the open. So they're getting all sorts of practical, larger life skills than just a specific lab skill, for example. And then after that, then they can start ranking. They can compare theirs to other class, and they can come up with here's our top questions that we have from the class, and maybe every group, suggest a couple, and you can build a driving question board off of that.
Nice. Yeah. And that's kind of where we're heading with the science and engineering practices, right? Like you got to ask questions, and some of those questions might lead to investigations. Some of those questions might lead us to, just looking up what is already confirmed science, or doing some research on stuff. So, it's cool that you can still do that even if you're not all in the same room.
Yeah. And it's, and like I said, that because we've already done some of that stuff in my classroom, it makes it a little easier. It's a little more difficult for teachers starting fresh, going, okay, hey, this is the thing I need to pursue, and I'm going to do that. I'd say it's still a worthy task to pursue. It's still, if there's any time to try something new and try something different, let's do it now, right? Let's do something new. Let's do something different, and try to help our kids learn science a little better.
Yeah. So you and I have actually known each other for a few years now. I think we met at an NSTA Science Teachers Conference about NGSS. Are there any other NGSS, sort of pedagogical or strategies or things that you've made sure that you've transferred from your regular face-to-face classroom into the virtual space? Or how did you decide what those important things were?
Yeah, that's one of the difficult things, because they're all so connected that, to do one well, you really need to do other ones well. But I do think, arguing from evidence is one that you can do. So we did one on, we were talking about, again, the mitosis-meiosis unit I was describing earlier. We talked about cancer, right, as a result of a failure of a mitosis somewhere along the line. It's running out of control there. And so we did a scenario, who has cancer? And here's a couple slides, and here are some points of evidence for cancer, and say, okay, make an argument. And so then I could put that up on Flipgrid, and the kids responded to each other in the group saying, oh, well, you said 1 and 3 have cancer, but I think your argument for number 1 actually could apply to number 2, and here's why. So I was really excited that the kids did that. Be able to turn it and just say, well, that argument you made actually also works for this other point because. And so when I hear kids talking like that, I'm like, okay, we got to win.
Yeah, you're good.
I mean, we've got to win.
Absolutely.
And then I tried a new one this week where we switch over to the structure of DNA a little bit now. If we talked general, I gave them a puzzle. It's all over I've seen it all over the web about it's like a paper model of DNA, and there's little plus signs and a house and the shapes of the A's and T's and G's and C's, and you kind of lay it out. So we took that and put it on a Google slide and said, okay, there's a puzzle here. You can solve it multiple ways. The only thing you have to do is be able to tell someone else the pattern that you used. So there's little shapes on, there's triangles and squares and dots. And kids came up with, 25, 30 different ways to do it. And they said, well, here's my pattern. Well, now you can have a conversation. What's the best pattern? How would we know that's the best pattern? Does that go with the other things that we've learned about, that there has to be some sort of connection between nucleotides? Oh, those are nucleotides? Well, yeah, they are, right? And you give that next little piece of information, which allows you to cycle back to the same model again. And then the kids can talk about it in their groups, and they can formulate again. And then eventually you can give a little more, another piece of the puzzle. And all of a sudden it's like light bulbs are going on. At least I'm imagining the light bulbs going on in their over their heads in their houses, right? As they're sending the stuff back into me saying, oh, this is how I would change my model now to fit the new evidence. So I think those, like looking for patterns and that argument, I think is a way that we can still keep going with the engineering and science practices.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. It even sounds like these practices kind of help you with the formative assessment, or as you're seeing the kids change, what they're focusing on, or maybe changing their models to explain things, that you can kind of assess where they're at. Have you found any solutions to sort of the grading issues or credits or anything like that?
So our school has decided to keep going with as much normalcy as we can. So one of the things that I'm doing, like realizing that I don't have that formative assessment, like teachers are always moving around, they're talking to their kids. And so, all the time on the fly, what's going through a kid's mind, just a single question here or there. So not having that, it's really challenging. So in order to try to fill the gap, I've been thinking and reading. I read a book called Powerful Teaching and Make It Stick. It talks about retrieval practices, like how you actually start getting kids to learn and retain a little bit more. And so one of their big ideas is you give more quote unquote quizzes more often and don't grade them. So just trying to force them to pull it out. And so I've tried that. So we normally would have a quiz, at like, let's say the halfway point. So I give them a quiz at the 15% and the 30%. And so they've had 2 interactions with it already. And then here comes the 50% marker. So they've seen it now 3 times, and I'm only grading the last one. And that seems to have helped with my assessment strategies a little bit. The kids don't do well on the first one, then they do better on the second one. And again, those 2 aren't graded. So I'm not spending a ton of time grading them, because we all have families. We all have, people that we got to take care of and go do things. And then that third one, then that's the one I'm grading. They know it's going to be set up that way. And so they have put in the time and effort, even by, just the repetition, and it starts getting in their head. So that's been helpful in terms of assessment that way.
That's a couple of things. Like I know since we've met, you've been following your sort of NGSS journey. But I also know you're kind of a big equity advocate, and it's something near to your heart and dear in terms of getting more kids involved in science. So what do you see going into into the summer, into the fall, in terms of maintaining that equity focus and keeping kids engaged in science?
Well, if there is a bright spot to this whole pandemic stuff, I think everyone is now aware how inequitable things are in a lot of different places. So I think that's going to generate a lot of conversation and hopefully some action to help alleviate some of that issue. To me, I think one of the biggest things is I just staying in contact somehow with the kids. So like I post random biology stuff. So I posted about, someone said something the other day about, we were talking about growth. And so I found an article on the guy with the longest fingernails. Here you go. Generate some conversations about the guy with the longest fingernails. And so just the whole idea, like the murder hornets business. Like I have a former student of mine that lives out in Washington, like an hour, maybe an hour and a half from where they found these things. Okay, well, these things are coming. What are we going to do, right? And so just even that phenomenon of trying to get kids talking and thinking about stuff, even if we don't do anything else, and we can have some sort of contact, and they kind of hear some science, and they generate some ideas, I think will be helpful, because in a situation like this, you got to kind of strip it down to its most basic components. Well, what's the most basic component of science? I think it's asking questions. And then everything else, from my point of view, my argument would be everything else flows out of that question. So if we can find crazy stories and different ideas, anything community-based stuff, like how come stuff's not growing yet, or maybe weeds are growing, but this isn't growing, or, those types of things. I saw a blue jay in the backyard. Well, how are there other ones? And even from K on all the way up, just asking those questions, getting kids to ask those questions, I think is a way that we can start attacking some of that drop off that we'll see because of these things that are happening right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you brought up of, community based, like look around, right? Starting with your house, look around your neighborhood, because there is so much science. I've just in being stuck at home, walking around the neighborhood, I've noticed a ton more things than I ever have, being in my car for, 30, 40 minutes driving to work. So, yeah, I really like that idea of let's find some science that's, just every day around us, and use that to engage students. So, well, thanks, Josh. You've given us a lot to think about. We really appreciate your family, and your teaching and your wife's work in the medical profession. So, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And let's check in again soon.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.